Welcome to Movao Live, where I interview people from our amputee community all about their empowering life stories. Today, I am joined by Andrew Simister, who was out riding his Harley-Davidson and he stopped in a lay-by and a truck lost control, hitting him from behind, resulting in his amputation. Fast forward to today, and Andrew is thriving. He is still riding his Harley. He is living life fully and at 60, which I'm sorry, Andrew, none of us believe. He was one of the first ever UK padel players for the Inclusive Padel Tour. Andrew, thank you so much for being here today. Can you take us back to the very beginning, the day of the accident, what you remember and what happened?
Friday, February the 25th, the day that changed my life forever. I was taking my Harley-Davidson Street Glide. It's a very big motorbike. It was white. I bought myself a white helmet to be more visible. I came onto the dual carriageway and my belt was flapping and it was distracting me. So I was taught early on that accidents are caused by distractions. So I pulled into a lay-by, and this lay-by didn't have any border or barrier between that and the dual carriageway. Standard lay-by. Switched the engine off, side stand down, and I was doing my belt up when all that I remember was this massive explosion in my head and myself being catapulted forwards with this big explosion of energy, thinking, what the hell's just happened? And my vision going from colour to black and white.
Wow.
And then waking up, I don't know how long I must have been unconscious for, but waking up in the dual carriageway on my stomach, looking at cars coming past me slowly, people leaning out, taking photographs of me, and feeling that my leg was in this position, that my right leg was up in the air, and there were a couple of people around me. I asked one of them to get my mobile phone. It was in my pocket, and I could remember to give them the access code to get in. And then I wanted them to phone my wife, and they did, but she didn't answer. And they managed to phone my twin brother, and I remember hearing this lady saying that, I've got your brother here, he's had a serious accident. I must have drifted off into unconsciousness again. The next thing I remember is that there's a fire engine turning up, and they were the first on the scene. And then I gathered the ambulance must have turned up and the police, but I was in and out of consciousness the whole time. I remember being in a lot of pain with my leg, and I asked that lady to put my leg on the ground. I think my leg must have been on the ground. It was smashed to smithereens. I had multiple compound fractures. I think my leg had turned around inside itself, so it's pretty much amputated, just with the flesh hanging around it.
Wow.
I remember they must have moved me from my frontum to my back. I still had my helmet on when I had the accident, and my gloves on. I had, body armor, which I think saved me, because the only injuries I had, apart from my leg being completely destroyed, was I had a broken back, which I didn't know until I got out of hospital. My back was broken or fractured, non-displaced fracture, L4, which it was, millimeters away from me being paralyzed, and probably millimeters away from me being killed. I mean, the first 3 calls that went in was that there was a motorcyclist dead on the A64. I remember hearing the air ambulance landing, and then I remember waking up.
So they were keeping you conscious throughout all this time and everything. That must have been really scary.
I was on helicopter ER and traffic cops, and it was really helpful because it filled in all of the blanks, this, when I was in and out of consciousness, what was going on. And one thing they asked me when the helicopter crew turned up was, did I have any other medical issues? And I had sleep apnea. And you hear them say, right, that causes a problem, because it means they couldn't give me the extra dose of ketamine or morphine that they needed to keep me pain-free, because of the sleep apnea and the restriction that it might have on my breathing. So they couldn't give me as much pain relief as they could. And I remember, I think your body takes over, obviously adrenaline. I didn't remember being in a lot of pain, but you could hear me at one point screaming on helicopter ER.
just explain that bit again, Andrew? Because I know we've had this conversation before as well, but your accident was later featured on
Yeah,
a program.
yeah, yeah. So the second police car that arrived at the scene had the film crew from Traffic Cops in. So they were working with North Yorkshire Police at the time. So the Traffic Cops film crew were there to film what was going on at the accident. So the Traffic Cops episode that I was on featured more about the police investigations, the accident, interviewing the guy that hit me, whereas the Traffic Cops was about the medical. Sorry, the helicopter ER was about the medical side and what they did to treat me when I got there. So it was quite interesting. It was quite harrowing to watch the helicopter ER episode, but it was also quite interesting.
I was going to say it must take a lot of courage for you to watch that and go and see it from a bird's eye perspective, everything that happened to you during that
Yeah,
experience. It must have been quite hard, surely, no?
yeah. The producer from Helicopter ER came to see me, and she showed me the film. She said, "This is what we're going to put out." Um, my wife Tess didn't want to see it. She didn't want to see what I'd gone through. And I must admit, once I'd seen it, I said, I just need a few minutes on my own. And I did have a little tear, I have to say. It was quite shocking. But I wanted it out there because I wanted to people to realize that everybody knows that a hard shoulder on a motorway, if you end up being unfortunate to have to park up there, you get out of your car, you go over the barriers. But on a lay-by next to a dual carriageway, and it's exactly the same thing, but you don't have that thought. I see cars pulled up the whole time there. I see people on motorbikes. I just think, get out of it because you never know what's going to happen. And I would never park in a lay-by now after my experience.
So what did the truck lose control then? It just, was driving
But
and
it was about 12:30 February, and it was a sunny day, but the sun was quite low in the horizon. The guy had apparently put his windscreen wipers on, and it just completely covered his windscreen with dirt, and he couldn't see. Um, and he didn't realise that he'd drifted across into the lay-by. And he actually continued. Once he hit me, he didn't just stop. He continued driving and ended up in a hedge.
my gosh.
Uh,
You
yeah.
were so
So
lucky to survive, weren't you? When you think of how extreme of an accident.
yeah, when you hit at 65 miles an hour by a Ford Ranger pickup truck, what does it weigh? 1.5 tons. I was extremely lucky to live. Extremely lucky. So
Wow,
yeah,
you definitely had your angels around you that day looking out for you.
I did. And for those that suffer trauma, it's quite a surreal experience. Just the process, because my leg wasn't amputated on that day. I woke up in I think it must have been the CT scanner or the MRI. There's massive noise and things, and in pain. And then I must have gone back to sleep. And the next day, I remember waking up in a room. Um, and there was my wife at one side, but also I had a very good friend who was a cardiac consultant at the LGI on the other side. And then all these doctors in front of me about what they were going to do. And they mentioned about amputation. And I said, you can't amputate my leg, you can't amputate my leg. So they said they would try and save it. And I've got a scar which stretches on my left leg from my groin all the way down to my ankle where they took out a donor vein. And they put that into my right leg. And they managed to get the blood flowing into my foot, but the calf and the shin and all of those muscles around there were so badly damaged that the option for them in the end was to amputate. And because of infection, it had to be amputated above the knee. And I think in total 5 operations and 7 blood transfusions because once they'd operated, there was still infection. They had to take more of the bone off and clean it all up. And
Yeah, sounds like a terrible, terrible thing for anyone to have gone through. So I'm sorry about that. Where did you at that time find your strength? Because obviously you really didn't want to lose the leg. And I guess there's a time where that choice is taken out of your control. It must be a very hard time. And how did you process that? And what kind of helped you support you through that?
Saturday, yeah, so from the Friday and then waking up, I think it was on the Wednesday, the 2nd of March is when they amputated my leg. And Tess was with me at my side when I came round um, to tell me that my leg had been amputated. And I was just in hysterics. I couldn't process it. Um, I can't remember when you're on high doses or high levels of ketamine and morphine, trying to
Mm,
process stuff going on. I thought I was in a factory. I didn't even know I was in a hospital. This is what's going on in my mind. I was having hallucinations. And I think a lot of trauma patients go through what, as my solicitor at the time said, it was icy mania, in intensive care mania because of all the drugs. And if you hear Jimi Hendrix on Purple Haze, well, I never understood it till I was in hospital. Everything was purple in my room. I
really?
had angel feathers. Anybody walked in, there was angel feathers coming around them, but there were devil eyes in a corner of the room, and I could just see these devil eyes
Oh
staring
my
at me.
goodness, that's so
And that
scary.
was, yeah, so I had the good parts and the bad parts of the hallucinations. Um, so my leg's been amputated. I'm in floods of tears. I thought, what do I do? So I asked the nursing staff to get me somebody from church services. I said, and I'm not a particularly religious person. And I said, I don't care, man, woman, Christian, Muslim, Jew, I don't care. I need to speak to somebody close to God. So that was going through my mind at the time. And this man came to see me. He was a Church of England reverend, and he was called Andrew as well. And he said, "You've asked to see me. What is it you want to see me about?" And I was in, I was in two minds. This is what I couldn't process. I was so grateful to be alive, but I was also devastated that I'd lost my leg. And he spoke to me about grief. He said, Andrew, you're grieving. Part of you died. That's gone away now. And I said, yes, yes. And I burst into tears and I grabbed his hand and I said, thank you. I just want you to pray and thank God for saving my life. And I remember grabbing his hands. And he then gave me this little wooden heart. And he said, this has got religious signification. It comes from, from Jerusalem. I held this wooden heart all the time I was in hospital. I couldn't let it out of my sight. And when he left the room, I knew I was going to be okay because I'd accepted my leg had gone. And I knew from that moment I could recover. And my brain process changed from self-pity and devastation to how am I going to do the best in my life that I've got now? And that's the mindset that I went through. Fast forward 12 months, my twin brother has a catastrophic stroke. He ends up in intensive care, brain damaged and paralyzed. And that's when I had to see the psychiatrist. I had a complete meltdown. And I went to trauma counseling and I had a lot of psychiatric help, which I'm not afraid to admit to anybody in that situation. If you need the help, ask for it. And I did. And I had a lot of PTSD sessions, the EMDR machine, everything to help me deal with process. But that only happened 12 months after my accident.
Horrible, isn't it? Really,
Mm.
really bad.
Yeah, yeah.
Really bad.
So to help me process, I had an electric car before my accident, and this is what I'm trying to equate in my mind. Got an electric car. When I plan my journeys now, I have to do things slightly different. The destination is the same as going in a petrol car, but I have to plan my route differently because I've got to stop somewhere and charge. And so I thought, right, I've got one leg. What I'm going to do, my life's going to be the same, but the do things will be different. The end goal that I want will be the same, but I've got to now navigate with having one leg.
It's how we adapt to it. Obviously, that was a hugely awful time for you to go through that period of your life, and then a year later for that awful accident to happen to your twin brother as well. I can't even think how tough that must have been on yourself personally, but also your family members. We don't often talk that much about the family when the person who has had an amputation or lost their leg or has been through the trauma, but they're also going through it as well. How did this all affect your family, and what support did they get? How did they support you? How did you support them? It must have been a really tough time for you all.
Yeah, I think, Tess got a knock on the door and it was the police. Yeah, husband's had a very serious accident. You need to go to hospital straight away. Am I going to live or die? She didn't know that. And it was touch and go whether I would live or die. And knowing then that her husband has changed forever, you know, he may have his leg amputated, and I did. How is it going to affect me, A, physically and B, mentally? And therefore, what's happening to her mind, what's she going through to deal with all of this? How will it have changed me? Because you've got to bear that in mind. I have changed, yes, physically, but have I changed mentally? Have I got any brain damage? They don't know these things because they haven't done the tests, which they did in, they did in time. But luckily, I had my helmet on, and that prevented any sort of a brain injury. But all of the support then comes to me as the individual who's had the accident, and there isn't any support for the family.
So should we now talk about, your rehabilitation journey and your first steps on a prosthesis? How did that part of your journey? How did you find that? Was it tough, or did you find adapting to walk as an amputee? Did you find it challenging, or was it better than you thought? Or take us back to that time.
When I was in the LGI, you've got to start to get moving. And the first thing you do is you go into a wheelchair and you get a banana board. And I thought, I don't need a banana board.
What is a
So this
banana
is very,
board, if I ask?
it's a flat implement that helps you shuffle or move across from a chair to a wheelchair, from a bed to a wheelchair, from your wheelchair to a car seat. So it helps somebody certainly who is paralyzed to be able to move across. So for amputees in the early days, I thought, I don't need this anymore. I can do it on my own. And I've done, during COVID, I did the Insanity Challenge, 64 days of high intensity cardio training. So a month before my accident, I started doing Insanity with weights to build up. For some reason, I don't know whether it was a premonition that I would need my upper body strength. So I was doing Insanity with weights. So at my amputation stage, I was quite fit and healthy. I was running, I'd run marathons in the past. I also had the mindset that I wanted to recover. And when I was in hospital, I watched the BBC One documentary about Billy Monger, and double amputee, one below, one above. And I got so much inspiration by watching him and his recovery and him going to the prosthetic center. And I started to then follow amputee athletes and watching their recovery and how they were dealing with things, that I couldn't wait to get my first prosthetic leg. But because I was a victim of an accident, I also had a case manager that was appointed to me by the insurance companies. So my first appointments to the prosthetic centre in Leeds was Seacroft Hospital. Absolutely brilliant. They did an assessment of my physical well-being, and they got me in my first prosthetic leg. But this one was a prosthetic leg as such, which is strapped around your waist for your leg to then go into it, and trying to then take your first steps in between the parallel bars. I couldn't believe how difficult it was.
Did it feel very strange? Because I've been an amputee my entire life. So I started walking on a prosthesis at 18 months. I did have an amputation when I was 6 years old. However, I don't really remember much of that rehabilitation journey. I was 6. It was in the 80s. You didn't really get much support back then. So I think my brain has kind of just hidden those moments of my life. How did you find that, like, feeling going into a socket? I would imagine that was a very strange sensation.
Yeah, it was. And also, my centre of gravity had shifted from being down the middle to my left hand side, because I had my left leg. So all my weight was bearing on my left leg. So as an amputee, that's what happens. And you have to then train your brain
Oh,
to
I've never
move your
thought of
centre of
that.
gravity back again. And that is still an issue. Why do I limp at times? Because I'm still leaning on my left, because that's my centre of gravity. And it's, the stuff that I had to then work on. And also for an amputee, as you know, your leg movement is by the weight that you put down on your prosthetic leg to then get the kick out going. So with a prosthetic leg, if you're not putting weight on it because it's on your left hand side, you can't get that kicking out motion to start with. So trying to do that first time, really difficult. And in some respects, quite upsetting, because you presume it's going to be pretty straightforward, and it's not. But I was determined that I wasn't going to give up, that I wanted to get walking as soon as I could. And I really pushed myself hard with I'd also started going back to the gym again. I joined a gym, which had a swimming pool, because as soon as my stitches were out, I wanted to go swimming.
I've only ever swum with one leg before, and someone said to me, Do you not? I can't remember if they'd lost their arm or their leg, but they were saying going round in circles. Did that actually
Well,
happen to you?
that is the standard joke. Did you swim in a circle? Well, the first thing is your body weight is different. And I started to roll over because I've
Oh
suddenly got
no,
more weight
I'm
on
not
one side
laughing.
than
It's
the
not
other.
funny. Mm.
And because you've got more power in one leg, you're like, it's like rowing one, you go round to start with. So you have to adapt and your brain has to adjust that side as well. Getting your balance right in the water and then swimming properly. And I learned how to do front crawl breathing. I'd never done that before as an able-bodied person. And I remember swimming a mile one day. It was like 60 odd lengths, 25-meter pool. I couldn't believe it. I'd swum a mile. Um, and I got, my level of fitness was quite good, trying to get my cardio going, but it was all aiming for me to be able to walk properly with a prosthetic leg. And also a leg that I wanted a microprocessor. And I'd seen these videos with guys with the Genium X3s, and that's the leg I wanted. And then in June, I got my first prosthetic leg that I could take home. And I got this massive leg. I take a look back at the videos now. I could only just get my shorts over the prosthetic because your legs swell so much after an amputation. And I had 2 walking sticks, and I had my first prosthetic leg, and I was allowed to wear it for an hour at a time to get used to my leg being in a socket. And I thought, bugger this, I just want to walk. And I did, and it was really difficult and so tiring. And at that stage, I ended up going into a convalescent home for a couple of weeks. Tess had booked to go on a holiday with her uncle. She said, "You have to go on your holiday. Do not let my accident ruin your life." And I went into a convalescent home for 2 weeks. And I know Tessa was really upset about leaving me. I said, "I'm going to be fine." And it was a lovely hot June. There were lifts, and I was in my wheelchair and my prosthetic leg, and it had a tarmac path. And there were various places where there were benches, and I used to walk and aim to get to the next bench, have a rest, aim to get to the next bench, have a rest. And I was like walking like 10 meters at a time before I had to stop and have a rest because it was so tiring to start.
Yeah, it's good that you had already in your mind that you knew that, because I talk to so many amputees, and it's always baby steps and celebrating those little wins. So the benches at this place were your benchmark, so to speak. So you're like, I'm going to get to this next one, and then I'm going to get to this one. And it's that perseverance that really makes us strong, but it's tough.
It goes back to that acceptance, and I think it was 4 days. So the amputation was the Wednesday. On the Sunday, I videoed myself on my phone in my bed on the LGI, and I put a post on Facebook about the fact I'd been involved in this catastrophic accident, my leg being amputated. But I said, my life hasn't stopped, it's just the start now. And I said, who knows, one day I might be a Paralympian. And I think in some respect, we've got quite close to that with the Inclusive Paddle Tour because we are competing as a country in international events. So I feel I've got close to that I set a bar quite high. I've then followed so many para athletes. All I wanted to see was amputees that were striving and succeeding at life. I wanted to hear their stories about the challenges they'd had, but I wanted to see the success stories. And I got involved with the Limbless Association, and I was appointed an amputee mentor who I could speak to. And I needed to speak to an amputee who was an above the knee amputee because he would understand the journey that I was about to go through because he'd done it. I got a chap called David, and he told me about the process that I would go through. And that's what I wanted to hear. I needed to know how hard it was going to be, but also the outcome at the end about walking, about getting a vacuum socket, what's that like? A silicon sleeve to go on it, and learning to walk with a microprocessor and the exercises, but also how it hadn't stopped him from doing the things that he wanted to do.
Yeah. So if, can you offer some, at the moment, there might be some people watching this who are going through that process at this time, learning to walk again. What tips can you offer them that might help them on their learning to walk journey?
Right. The first thing I would say is don't give up. Even when it gets tough, do not give up. get your head right first. Recovery is 80% mental, 20% physical. And because I got my head right, I knew the physical things would come right as well. Because I didn't stop believing that I would be walking again. And I pushed so hard, I worked hard, I did my exercises, and walking started to get easier. You know, I am nearly 4 years into being an amputee, and I still have room for improvement. I still have a lot of room for improvement. I can see that my gait, you know, I used to walk like that. It's getting narrower and narrower and narrower. And, you know, I have videoed myself or got tested video of me, but I also love when I'm out walking my dogs where, you know, if I can see my shadow in front of me, I can then work to get my legs closer together, walking like that.
It's
Do that.
interesting. So when learning to walk, because obviously this is something new to me hearing this, do you generally start with your gait and your legs wider then, and then they become closer? Because I didn't know that.
It's gait training, getting your legs closer together. And in the end, you've got to walk like a catwalk model. Yes, that's the idea. And, you know, going to Dorset Orthopedic, they've got lines which they want you to walk one leg in front of the other to get that gait training. And God, it is difficult. It really is. I was going to say something about, I don't know about you with your walking. You were so young that it just came naturally.
Well, because I was born with PFFD, limb difference. My left leg didn't form correctly. And so I had a prosthesis fitted at 18 months old. But because my leg on my left-hand side was too long, the prosthesis that I had was a kind of wooden peg leg. So it was a straight leg. It was made out of wood. It was
Yeah,
terrible. Nothing
like a
like the
pirate.
prosthesis technology today.
Yeah.
Honestly, I wish I had one, wish I'd kept one to show how bad it was. But I still remember that prosthesis so much. And anyway, life was getting really impractical, getting in a car, you've got like a straight leg. So at 6 years old, it was decided that I would have it amputated. So therefore I could have an above knee prosthesis. And yeah, I adapted really quickly. I don't really remember much of that process. That's why I find it very fascinating listening to other people's stories. But yeah, I don't know any difference. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's just me.
I think from my journey as well, which every amputee will be the same, is understanding that how much your leg shrinks, you know, to get to the end size. I must have gone through 7 or 8 sockets because pretty much as soon as I got my first socket, my leg went into it, it suddenly shrunk. And you have to prepare to put socks in and layers in to pad it out. And then to have a socket that fits comfortably is just what you need, but it makes your life a misery.
It's one of the biggest challenges, isn't it? Being an amputee all my life, I still face the very same difficult challenges of getting a good fitting socket made. And the thing is that I always find it probably takes about 3 months to adjust to any slight adjustment to your socket or your prosthesis. So I understand that sometimes you need to give yourself time to adjust to that slight change. But when the prosthesis isn't right, or even alignment can cause lots of issues as well, that it can make life quite miserable. There was a phase, I'm quite active, and I was having a terrible year, really terrible. I couldn't walk for very far. And we found out in the end, it was just a slight alignment change, but it was causing so much issues. I couldn't even chase the kids around town. It was that bad, debilitating. So yeah, it is so important out there for anyone who's struggling walking that they definitely speak to their prosthetist and make sure that their alignment and their socket are good, really, because it's the foundation as well, isn't it? The socket, you get that right, then kind of everything else tends to follow.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So just got to get used to it. Everybody assumes that once you've got your prosthetic leg, that life is hunky dory and you can walk and you can do whatever you want. But as amputees, I think we all know that that is not quite the case.
I was going to talk about this as well. But I was going to say, for me, obviously I've grown up with a limb difference, and I've accepted it. Still today, there are things about it that I don't like, but of course, I'm happy with myself and the opportunities that I've had in life. For you, it was a quick transition to becoming an amputee. How was your self acceptance journey with having a missing leg? Was that quite an easier process for you? Have you accepted that, or do you find it hard sometimes?
Actually, what the most upsetting incident for me was when I went to my gym and I went swimming, and I've got they call it a commode chair, which is a white plastic chair, wheelchair, which they keep at the gym for me. And so, 'cause when I finish in the gym, I go to the changing room, I take my leg off because I want to go for a shower and for a swim. And getting out of the pool one day, this little girl saw me and she just started screaming and pointing at me. And that sort of knocked my confidence a bit. And, you know, most amputees wear, shorts, or they've got the leg on display, and people do stare and they point and they look and they judge and things like that. And I suppose being involved with the inclusive paddle tour when everybody has a limb difference is a time where I probably feel the most comfortable, because nobody's there judging, nobody's there looking, saying, "Oh, what's happened to you?" The questions that you ask is about recovery. What side do you have? What leg do you have? Did you ever have this? Did you ever have that? And we're all in the same situation, and that's what I really love about playing in these tournaments, because it is a community.
Let's talk about the inclusive paddle tour. For anyone out there who doesn't know what padel is, hasn't played before, please explain to everyone what it is, how you discovered it, and how it's such a fantastic and inclusive sport for people of all various disabilities, ages, and the camaraderie behind it all.
Yes, so paddle tennis, not to be confused with paddle boarding, because I have tried that and I fell off quite a few times. But so paddle tennis is a mixture of squash and normal tennis, and it's played on courts which are enclosed at the back and part of the sides with glass. So it was my son and one of my friends said, "Oh, there's this new sport. It's called paddle. You should give it a go, because as an amputee, it's enclosed and I think you'd enjoy it." So I went along and I had a paddle lesson, and I really enjoyed it. And then I started to follow an Italian amputee, Alessandro Sala, and I sent him a message that said, "If you ever come to the UK, I'd love to come and watch." And he sent me a message straight back saying, "Can I call you?" And I thought, well, this is a bit strange. What does he want to speak to me for? And then he played paddle once. And I said, "Yeah, go on then." And he said, "Andrew, why watch? Why not play?" And I went, "Because I've already played a couple of times." He said, "I don't care. We want to grow this sport. It's the inclusive paddle tournaments that we have. Why don't you get involved?" I only had one lesson. I thought, no, I'm not going to do it this year because it just doesn't fit in. I need to get some more practice, have some more lessons. I said, I will join the tour in January 2024. And it was in Milan. And I became the first British amputee to get involved with them. And I absolutely loved it. And that's because everybody had a limb difference. We were all the same, different nationalities, all embracing the fact that just we are disabled, but we can get involved with sports. And every team was made up of a disabled player with an able-bodied player. And for the first tournament, my son came with me, and it was absolutely incredible. So my wife came and my daughter came to see me getting involved. And I made so many friends from the first day that I took the decision that I would do every tournament that was out there. The second tournament was in Barcelona, but I'd had revision surgery, so I'd only been back in my socket for about a week, so I didn't want to play. But I went to watch and support them. And then I did the rest of the tour that year. The final tournament was in Lugano in Switzerland. And by that stage, we've got another young amputee called Malik, who's a below the knee amputee. We've got Kristen and Lewis, who were wheelchair players. So the British contingent was building up. And then we hosted our very first UK tournament, the Inclusive Paddle Tour, came to Maidenhead. And 2 weeks later, we hosted our very first British tournament, the Inclusive Paddle Tour, came to Maidenhead. And 2 weeks later, we hosted our very first UK tournament, the Inclusive Paddle Tour, came to Maidenhead. And Rebecca, we met you in, I think, in the August, didn't we? We had a
Yeah.
IPT UK Inclusion Day to get anybody who was British who hadn't actually played an inclusive paddle tour before to come down to meet some of the players that had. Some of the Italians turned up, and then it was to get you know, understand the format, but also get to know the players. And I think you were hooked when you went to that, weren't you? I think you really liked it.
Really enjoyed it, and I actually have joined a club locally to myself, and I play it very often. The great thing that I found with it is, and what I find with my local club as well, is that paddle is so inclusive. You can start from any ability, which there might be a misconception by seeing all the pictures. Don't get me wrong. Some of the competition, some of the players out there are absolutely extraordinary, aren't they? But then you can start at a lower level and build your way up. And you can also play against people of all sorts of different limb differences. You can play with a wheelchair user, above knee amputees and wheelchair users. We get a second bounce, don't we?
We
And
do. We're very
I
fortunate.
yeah, and I tell you what, going to play at my local club, the people there just say, "We can't believe you having that extra bounce, how that really helps you
Yeah.
and levels the playing field." So I play, you know, predominantly, unless I go to an inclusive paddle tour, I'm playing with people that are able-bodied who are
Same here.
non-disabled. So,
Yeah.
but having that bounce really enables me to be able to partake in a sport which, if it didn't have that rule, then I probably would struggle and I wouldn't feel that I could keep up. So, yeah, I really, really enjoy that. As we're talking about sport, Andrew, how was your journey getting back to sport? Because I believe you're doing lots of various different things. You've got a running blade, and let's talk about how you got back into adaptive exercise, try and exercise again for the first time as an amputee.
Well, as an amputee, my first exercises was in a wheelchair. So I'd go to the gym in my wheelchair, got myself a personal trainer who must have thought, what the hell have we got here? Guy in a wheelchair with one leg. And he was a boxing coach. I think that was his background. He'd been a boxing coach. So he got me on the punch bag. But then he was doing all things to get my core, because the two areas which I have to work on every amputee is your core and your glutes. Fire your
Absolutely.
glutes up and work on your core, because that's where your momentum as an amputee to get your limb moving comes from. So he did lots of core work with me, a lot of glute work. And then after being in the gym for an hour PT, I then go swimming, and I do minimum of 20 lengths in the pool. And that's what I continue to do. I tried doing some sorts of gym classes at home, the insanity classes, but it's not quite the same. Trying to adapt myself to do star jumps and things like that. I've got kettlebells, and sometimes I will do a kettlebell class, so that's very good because it does your core, it does the weights. And then I got a running blade. I had to buy my own running blade, which isn't cheap, and it's very difficult to learn how to run them.
I have a running blade as well, and I really struggle with running on it. It's something I can do it, but not that great. And I prefer the knee to be locked. So I feel like there's more safety there while I'm running on it. But what I really love it for is bounce exercises. So like you mentioned, then your star jumps, your skipping, put it on a locked knee and do things like that. And I find it's a really great way to, like you were saying, the boxing, jumping from side
Yeah,
to side and boxing, this springy type of bouncing exercises that we can't do on a regular prosthesis because it's too clunky and heavy. Using your blade, you can actually adapt it and do those kind of
I don't even know.
exercises. No, it's something I discovered myself, so I'm not too sure if there's supposed to be used like that. But a running bounce surely is the same as just a bounce. So much fun skipping on it.
So I've got an offset cheater knee, so I need to know if I can lock it. I need to find out. Oh, the reason I got a blade is I've done 2 marathons with 2 legs, and I'd like to do 1 marathon with 1 leg. So that is a goal I am aiming my sights at, is to do a marathon. It was tough with 2 legs, so let's see if I can do it with 1 leg.
Are you meaning a full marathon or a half a
Yeah, there's only one
marathon?
marathon, not something that you eat, not a Snickers bar marathon, a proper 1 marathon, 26.2 miles. I've done New York twice with 2 legs, and I aim to do it with 1 leg.
Phew. Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That must have been absolutely extraordinary. So really, you should go back to New York and do New York Marathon as an amputee.
that's what I'm aiming to do. The only thing that gets me is the sweat and having to take your leg off, dry out your leg, put your liner back on. Sweat is a big issue for me, as it is with a lot of amputees. After every paddle set, I have to take my leg off and dry it and put it back on again. Big issue. So, but that's something that you have to deal with, unfortunately.
It is, and it's horrible, isn't it? Because once you get sweaty, it slides off, or it's the environment for sores. I don't know if we're gonna ever get a liner which is fully breathable that's ever stopped sweating. It's, yeah, something that we have to deal with, when we're partaking in exercise. I'm gonna ask you my final question because this is one of my, favorite questions, because it can really help someone who may be going through a similar traumatic experience that you did, and they might be going through it now. What advice would you, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself, would have helped you on your amputation journey?
Well, so the first bit of advice is don't park in a lay-by, and I wouldn't have lost my leg. If I could go back in time, I would say, don't be afraid. And don't put barriers in your way for doing things, which I still can do. If somebody says to me, we want to go and do this, I always say, I can't do it, I can't do it. And then I think to myself, why can't I do it? Because it's this that's telling me I can't do it when I really can. You know, my first what's been really good for me about the inclusive paddle talk is going to hotels where I would take my wheelchair to start with, but the wheelchair users are in the accessible rooms. And I've had to learn how to adapt. So I use crutches when I don't have my leg on, but learn to adapt. There's lots of help and advice out there. Don't think it's the end of the world. It's just the start of your new journey. I read a book. It was a Hybrid Human, and that was a fantastic book. It was about a soldier who lost, I think he lost certainly two limbs. I don't know if he lost three, one below, one above, and listening to him and his story. So it was all of this, the motivational side. It was the success stories. Listen to the success stories, read about it, follow them on Instagram, and get that inspiration that you need. I'm 60. If I can do it, you youngsters can. And even the older ones as well. You know, Rebecca said about me riding a Harley-Davidson. Yes, I have a Harley-Davidson, but it's a trike now because I had to adapt. I don't want to particularly be on two wheels again. So I've got a nice Harley-Davidson trike, which is adapted for me. I've got special brakes on the handlebars, and a friend of mine made a cage for my foot to go in because, like bicycles or anything like that, your foot bounces, it always bounces off the pedals. So I've got a foot plate in my Harley, and I built a cage for me to put my foot in to keep it static there. But just try and be positive. Think about the things you can do, not the things you can't do. I've climbed the O2, as one of my friends keeps telling me when I say I can't do something. I did with Limb Power, and I did the O2 challenge with them. Yeah, and it was brilliant. The other things I've done, I've got involved with charity work. So I'm a trustee of a disability charity now. So I'm doing things to help others rather than just about me. I do, with my motorbike association. We did things this first time. We did an egg run for disadvantaged children and people with learning difficulties, and giving out Christmas presents and fundraising. So I do a lot for both the people out there that got physical and mental disabilities. You know, like I said, dated earlier, my brother is now in a care home because he's brain damage and he's paralyzed down one side. So, you know, dealing with that and channeling my energies into other things now.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good advice, Andrew. Thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story with us. If you all enjoyed this episode, please do like and comment because it really helps YouTube push the Movao content out to those who would really appreciate watching it. So anyway, thank you everyone. Thank you, Andrew. It's been a pleasure. And until next time, ciao.